Unlocking the Soul, hosted by Rob Simperman and produced by Simplify Films. Episodes cover mature and controversial themes, including death, murder, and suicide. Consider this when deciding whether and when to watch.
51. Suicide and the Soul. Suicide. The act of taking one's own life voluntarily and intentionally. An ugly word. We all know what it means for the body. It's the end of a life, or an earthly incarnation, if you will. What is going on with the soul? Is this act planned in advance? Does it lead to some sort of punishment or even damnation? Or could it be a step on our growth path? This is one topic I had not delved into in too much depth previously, but I had a college friend and a high school friend who each committed suicide. And then, just recently, I learned of another dear friend who lost her young adult son in this tragic way. So I felt some urgency to explain this topic from a spiritualism perspective. But I need to start by saying that if you're thinking about suicide or worried about a friend or loved one and would like emotional support, the Suicide and Crisis Network is available 24/7 across the United States by calling or texting 988. It's free and confidential. And if outside the U.S., please find the comparable local support system. I'm not a psychologist or a therapist myself, just a spiritual researcher. 52. Motivations for suicide. Let's start out looking at some of the factors that drive people to suicide. After that, we'll look for evidence about the repercussions of suicide on the soul. And finally, we'll talk about some therapies or ways to help a troubled soul. My most prolific sources on this topic is the channeled work of Jane Roberts and her 1,500 sessions channeling a disincarnate ascended being named Seth. And that material includes 73 passages with reference to suicide. Now, it's important to understand that souls didn't come to Earth to be perfect. They came to learn lessons and experience the low-frequency Earth like a schoolhouse. As we have reviewed, Dr. Newton and Dolores Cannon found that the root cause of many seemingly evil acts is when soul influence, which is seen as the conscience, is too weak to override human impulses. This could simply be the result of underestimating the portion of a soul's energy required for a particular incarnation, or overestimating their current skill level. Remember that souls are the ultimate multitaskers. While you are here, parts of your soul may simultaneously be living other lives, learning new skills, building worlds, or guiding others. So, souls may make unwise allocation decisions, leaving them unprepared for a challenging life. Now, these souls will likely get an earful from their guide and the elders when reviewing the life, but first, damaged souls will recuperate and repair energy after a hard life. They can take as long as they need in what some describe as an emerald city where they get help from healing specialists. Seth also described an initial stage for those focused strongly in the physical reality and in need of a period of rest. He says our guides can hallucinate a hospital or a rest home on our behalf for a break or to orient us to the situation. And they may even take a resting life after a hard one to refresh their energy, a sabbatical of sorts, before proceeding. But lives that are so hard that they result in suicide are a subset of those hard lives. So what are those troubled souls dealing with? People often think of preconditions for their happiness. Maybe they feel like their worthiness depends on parental acceptance, respect from their community, a happy marriage, a conventional gender identity, or the accumulation of wealth. Seth further explains that it's silly as it sounds, some people have committed suicide because they accept wealth as a precondition to exist. In fact, they fail to appreciate loving relationships because of this belief. It interferes with their experience of the miracle of life entirely. Coupled with illogical traps, poor communications may lead to a basic misunderstanding of the situation one finds oneself in. Seth explained that often a potential suicide victim misinterprets the motives of family and friends due to lack of communication with others. Similarly, poor communications rob the individual from expressing their own wishes and needs for help. And finally, a personality trait that Seth points to as increasing the likelihood of suicide, ironically, is a need to feel more alive. He explains that it is often taken for granted that people who end their lives are afraid to live, but often the situation is the opposite, with their lust for life driving them to put their lives in danger to experience life in a heightened form. And as humans, we innately feel drawn to cooperate with and to be helpful to other people in a way that contributes to the most common good. Seth says many people who commit suicide feel to the contrary that they are no longer needed, or in fact that their very existence stands in the way of other people's happiness. So somewhat counterintuitively in this matter, someone's position in society doesn't correlate with their perceived self-worth. Seth says that young people committing suicide are not exclusively from the poorest or lowest class of their society. Ironically, poverty often drives people to focus on meeting their daily needs to simply survive to such an extent they don't have time for such existential thoughts as whether their life is worth living. And sometimes a soul's feeling of uselessness is related to their specific pre-planned goals for this incarnation. A subject of A Hypnotist's Journey to the Secrets of the Sphinx by Sarah Breskman-Cosme describes that in a former life, she was lobotomized in a mental institution in response to her sharing her past life memories with her more judgmental society of the 1970s. She knew that she would never be taken seriously after that procedure, and her ability to further share her wisdom was over for that lifetime. So she decided to end her abusive existence in the asylum and exited her body just in time to watch it drop down from the Brooklyn Bridge into the river below. She then took a few years in a resting place to reflect and relax. She concluded that her mistake was being too impatient with revealing her information. But she understood that she would have to repeat the mission of that life, and is doing so now by sharing the same revealed knowledge more effectively in this lifetime, now that the timing is right and our society is more open-minded. Seth was also a big proponent of our belief systems, which are often passed down through generations or even from past lives, leading to the positive or negative emotions that bring about a physical or emotional illness. But just as the cause is internal to the soul, so is the solution. He says, quote, "It is important to note that regardless of the mental or physical illness adopted, it is chosen for a reason, and is a natural method that the individual himself knows he is physically and mentally equipped to handle." He further describes how we can teach children in particular that instead of developing a belief system that an illness will worsen without an external therapy, he suggests instead having a child play a game in which they visualize being completely healthy, playing outdoors, for example, or have the child imagine a conversation in which they describe the illness as no longer ailing them. So it's not surprising that mind-altering drugs, whether prescribed, recreational, or illegal, should be used with utmost caution, particularly by people in depressed states. Seth explains that, under drugs, choices become limited, and certain people have committed suicide while under the influence of drugs who may not have otherwise. I'm not saying that drugs alone will cause suicide, but that the psychology of drugs already includes an attitude that promotes a Russian roulette style of mentality that can only add to the problems. Now, those who feel compelled to escape a dire state of health, called euthanasia, is a special case. And I want to be clear that most spiritual sources would not even group that in with suicide at all. Dr. Newton says on this matter, "I want to add that those who escape from chronic physical pain or almost total incapacity on earth by killing themselves feel no remorse as souls. Their guides and friends also have a more accepting view toward this motivation for suicide." So here's an interesting reason behind some souls choosing an early exit. Some people who have a very challenging life are from a cohort of souls who often feel like they don't belong here. They might feel like they constantly yearn for their true home, or even feel like being human is a mismatch or mistake for their souls. Dolores Cannon and others have extensive findings about the so-called 3 waves of volunteers. These souls came to Earth not for their own development goals, but to help the Earth raise its frequency for the current ascension to a higher plane. They may be from an alien world, they may be energy beings or ascended souls coming back for a lifetime. However, particularly the initial wave, those who would be elderly now, often resorted to suicide from the frictions in the transition to their first human incarnations. The appropriate response is to thank these souls for their selfless service to humanity. And to an extent, every death is a suicide from the soul's perspective. This is because each soul chooses its exit points in advance. In most cases, death is purely an individual and personal decision, but in some cases, souls choose to partake in a mass event for the good of the society. Think about the societal stress over wars and the recent surge in mass shootings or the recent pandemics. Remember that a society is meant to be a rich learning environment for the souls incarnate here. As such, sometimes we need emotional stress in situations that are tough to react to. Seth explains back in 1977, when polio and Spanish flu were the recent pandemics, quote, "To a certain extent, epidemics are the result of a mass suicide phenomenon on the part of those involved. Biological, sociological, or even economic factors may be involved, in that for a variety of reasons, and at whole different levels, whole groups of individuals want to die at any given time, but in such a way that individual deaths amount to a mass statement. So in that case, we don't have to think too hard to identify the mass statements made by those exiting during the recent COVID-19 pandemic, which was ripe with social, political, geopolitical, familial, and medical debates that stretched our logic and emotions raw. Made it an interesting time to be alive for sure. 53. Repercussions of suicide. Let me make it clear that there is a consensus among spiritualist sources that no one is damned for committing suicide. There is no particular punishment as such. In fact, our spiritual experts agree that there is no hell at all, and there is no personified evil or Satan, nor is there eternal damnation. The idea that good needs to be balanced by evil is just rationalization for our fallibility by our logical minds. As one of Cannon's subjects tell her, there is no good or bad souls, only evolving souls, but some have bad lives. This is obvious to our higher selves, but our earthly minds get confused by ego and logic. In fact, renowned channel Paul Selig tells us there's outrage in the higher dimensions that man created damnation for himself, when there was meant to be love, and that we have slaughtered innocents on earth in the name of God, who is nothing but love made manifest. Like with anything else, the beliefs of the individual are important drivers for the repercussions one can expect. Seth refers to this as the inner reality and realization of the individual. As such, an action drenched in guilt will set the soul backwards in its progress. Seth states that the mere belief that suicide will permanently annihilate the consciousness, which is not the case, may impede the soul's progress. This is because suicide is often associated with guilt in many religions and philosophies, which must then be overcome. In addition to guilt, sadness or despair are other emotions our souls may feel after a suicide. One of Dr. Newton's subjects described a meeting with their guide after a taxing life that ended in suicide. After being asked whether his guide was upset with him over their recent life, he responded that, "No, I'm more upset with myself over what I did and didn't do, and he knows that. Advisors can be displeased, but they don't humiliate us. They are too superior for that." And when asked directly whether anyone will condemn him for committing suicide, he responded, "Well, my friends won't give me any pats on the back either. I feel sadness for what I did." Newton also talks about how each bodily incarnation imprints on a soul, which takes a while to dissipate after death. So a soul is bathed in an energy shower to restore it. He asks the subject if the ravages of the physical body and the human mind leave an emotional mark on the soul after death, and is told, "God, yes, my very expression, who I am as a being, was affected by the brain and body I occupied." He also draws on a parallel between such transition periods and the concept of purgatory, which is a transitory state of temporary banishment for sins of a minor nature, and the Tibetan Buddhist concept of the bardo, a spiritual separation between lives to absolve evil acts. Cannon found that souls who die while addicted to drugs, alcohol, lust, or other low-energy habits are not ready to reincarnate. They spend time watching the physical world as if trying to satisfy their cravings. This is similar to the Buddhist concept of the hungry ghosts. But when ready to move on, they get the same assistance and healing that other souls do and resume their reincarnation cycle. One of Cannon's subjects makes it clear that there is no concept of payback with regards to karma. Rather, a soul may want to understand the reasoning behind an act by experiencing the complementary reality, or to be on the other side of the stick. Then it's not necessary to repeat such mistakes. We are our own judge and jury, her subjects say, and thus we decide our own penance or subsequent lessons. But sometimes we need guidance to get back on the path from our guide or the elders when our judgment gets clouded by challenging situations. Next, we'll review some specific guidance for dealing with people who have suicidal tendencies from our spiritual sources. 54. Guidance on interventions. Intervention 1. Communication and engagement. Seth provides guidance for when someone reaches out with suicidal impulses, saying that communication and engagement are often keys to clearing up the confusion and isolation they may feel. Would-be suicides, for all their secrecy, usually do mention the subject to a friend, relative, or close family member. The subject should not be ignored or condemned, but honestly examined. Part of the mystique of the suicidal impulse is indeed the secretive aspect. So the very expression of the feeling is beneficial and leads to better communication. Indeed, part of the would-be suicide's dilemma may be caused by a lack of communication with others, a misinterpretation of the motives of friends or family members, and a difficulty in expressing one's own needs and wishes. Intervention 2. Spontaneity and being present. We talked earlier about logic traps and living in your thoughts as a trap that can lead a person to conclude that suicide is called for, the only escape, even inevitable. So it should come as no surprise that the opposite of overthinking is a remedy for suicidal thoughts, trusting one's own spontaneity. The will to live is also inbred in each element of nature, and if you trust your own spontaneity, then that will to be is joyfully released and expressed through all of your activities. It can also quite literally wash depression and suicidal tendencies away. And of course, a related concept to spontaneity is being present, as enabled by meditation practices that allow us to demote our thoughts to the rightful place as features of the mind rather than the mind's dictator. Everyone from Buddha to Jesus understood meditation can play a central role in a healthy mind, body, emotions, and soul. Intervention number 3, group therapy. We're told by Seth that the inclusion of an individual in some kind of group situation is an effective intervention. The communication between people who share contemplated suicide serves as a support system, especially when overseen by a therapist. When I read about the tools that spirit guides can employ in this next quote, I can't help thinking about the angel Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life, helping George see the world if he takes the suicide route. Seth tells us that between lives, we have teachers available to explain the true situation to our souls. They have therapies at their disposal, such as the reviewing of the events of our lives that led up to such a decision. They can also provide a temporary amnesia about the suicide act and use that to help the soul deal with the decision free from the guilt of the ultimate outcome of the path they chose. Intervention number 4, walk-ins. Dolores Cannon identified another shocking intervention. She encountered a so-called walk-in situation in response to a planned suicide in her very first book, 5 Lives Remembered. In this case, the woman prepared to commit suicide. She even had a large party to see her friends one last time. But after the party, the woman had a dramatic and positive personality change and never committed suicide or considered it ever again. Through her hypnotherapy session, she learned that her original soul brought too little soul energy for this life. She revised her soul contract to allow a more mature soul to take over and overshadow her, take over that life. This is possible because not all souls enter into babies. There is an alternate path for souls who get in over their head to swap bodies as adults. Such an exchange of soul is always agreed to in advance by the departing and the replacement soul, so it's still an act of free will. This is what's known as a walk-in. 55. The bigger picture. We can't end without considering the impact of suicides on loved ones left on Earth. In the book Wisdom of Souls from the Michael Newton Institute, we learn of a regression hypnosis case where a woman recalls a life with decades of intense grief after her son's suicide. In her session, she was able to talk to her guides and her deceased son's soul, who explained the circumstances of the death. She had a very strong bond with her 2 sons. After her first son's heart attack, she felt cheated and responsible for the suicide of her second son. Her second son told her that it wasn't her fault, and that he exercised free will in his exit from that lifetime. He's already reincarnated on the far side of the world with a new family and happy children of his own. Through the session, she was able to find closure and improve her life and mental health. While a trying experience for all involved, suicide is one of the rich tools that the universe has made available to souls granted free will as human beings. As such, we need to consider the role of suicide in the developmental path of the soul without judgment for those who utilize it. Here's the best quote I've found to help us see the bigger picture of suicide on the soul, from Wisdom of Souls. My suicide and the mental health problems in past lives have taught me a lot. I have good insight into others and what my clients are experiencing. I have been an abuser in past lives, but that was a long time ago. From that, I have insight into the perpetrators, and now I know that they feel vulnerable and like victims inside. Everything I've experienced has taught me insight, compassion, and understanding. I'll leave you with those parting words, my friends. And again, take all these insights as tools to help you understand the role that suicide plays in the reality of souls incarnate on Earth. But again, if you need additional resources, please reach out to a trained professional on these matters.